Hello, and let me begin by saying that it's a joy and a privilege to share my reflections on the Word with you once again. I congratulate you on the change in your name, reflecting your willingness to progress on your journey as an online worshiping community, extending your welcome all across the world. Today, I'm focusing on the parable of the sower. And as I've been preparing, I've needed to consider the need for context to inform the text, or to use John Dominic Crossan's terminology, I've needed to step inside the matrix. What is it in the set of circumstances found in Roman occupied Judea are relevant to grasping the wisdom of this story? Well, I've needed to remind myself again of the unique challenges of Mediterranean farming. First, the way in which seed was sown and plowed. In Mediterranean crop farming, the farmer did not have neat, straight furrows in which to drop seed. They practiced broadcast sowing, scattering seed hither and yon in their fields. Only after this was done was the seed plowed under the soil. And moreover, because Mediterranean soil was more pliable than that we find in North America, a plow didn't need to be much more than a glorified digging stick. And there were the same traps that are mentioned in the parable. Footpaths were common between our agricultural plots, and as you'd expect, the dirt on these footpaths were very dry and packed down hard. It wasn't uncommon for soil in many areas to be thin and rocky, covering a foundation of limestone. And yes, there were the bane of every farmer's and gardener's existence, weeds. In this case, the weeds were thorns and thistles. And it's also important to remember that in this time, it was expected that a peasant farmer would have a fivefold harvest for the seed that was planted. And if a farmer had a tenfold harvest, well, that was considered great. Now, also, as I've been preparing, I've had some discomfort with using farming analogies, lest I fall into grandiose missionary analogies of a field of souls ripe for harvest. As a minister in an indigenous community, um, I'm happy to leave that behind. However, I must also admit that this is the place where I am. This is the place where I lead worship and visit and give counsel and involve myself in community life. So if I go out standing in my field, what do I see? There's plenty of evil to snatch people away around here. Even the establishment of a detachment of the Manitoba First Nations Police Service here in Fisher River and a recent drug bust, those things have not stopped the destruction of addiction. In this place, we've had two deaths recently, one of a 17-year-old young man and another of a 41-year-old mother of two who could not conquer their struggles. We receive regular updates in this place about how supplies of drugs like fentanyl are now laced with tranquilizers. And I have received training in how to administer naloxone in case I come across someone who has overdosed. I'm in that unenviable position of hope I never have to, but ready if I must. I also see the seeds which fall in shallow soil. For there are people who are ready to embrace the life of faith when there's a family emergency, or when they want to have a celebration for a child's birth, for example. But after the earth has been scattered, and after the baptismal water has been splashed, the interest fades away. I've also encountered those who've come out to see the new minister. And they're interested, they attend for a while, and they might even get involved in a committee or a program. But then they fade away too. And let's not forget those whose interest has been choked away by the cares of the age. The same streaming television services, and the same social media traps, and the same pop culture influences which contribute to the secularization of urban culture and which compete for people's attention, these things are just as present here. We're fighting with the same lures and temptations that you would experience in the cities. And it hasn't been that the United Church of Canada hasn't tried to take its place in this modern landscape, this 21st century landscape. We've had tons and tons of promotional ad campaigns. We even had our own television show in the 1990s. And we had one of the first web-based discussion groups in the 2000s. And interestingly enough, one of those discussion boards had as a starting conversation topic, what would it be like to have a Jesus bobblehead kind of statue? And in spite of these efforts, the prediction for 2035 is that we are going to be a denomination of less than 100,000 members, regular attendance of 30,000, if we're lucky, and fewer than 10,000 in Christian education programs. That includes Sunday school and adult programs. This for a denomination which, at its peak in 1965, had 1 million members in a population of less than 20 million. How the mighty have fallen. And yet, it's still possible to find the seeds which fall in good soil. There are those who turn their lives around from cycles of addiction and trauma and build new lives with focus and hope. There are those who work hard at being good parents to their children and who support siblings and kin. There are those who, whether it be through Christian faith or embracing indigenous ceremony and tradition, known as walking the red road, are making room for the spiritual in their lives. We've had a few examples of that this in the last little while. As I record this sermon, we're finishing up a camp which has included both non-Indigenous and Indigenous youth who are interested in exploring ways of reconciliation. And as a result of that, young people who didn't know all that much about the Christian way, they ask me questions about they ask me questions about Jesus. Was he Jewish? Or someone who saw a picture of Jonah and the great fish asks, what's that all about? And as a result, I gave the too long didn't read version of the book of Jonah. And by the time you hear this sermon, I will have participated for the second time and danced for the first time in the local Sundance. I'm finding that as I become more integrated into this community and into this way of life, I'm finding that embracing elements of the Red Road are very important for my own spiritual development and for acceptance in the community. Now, I know there will be pushback. There will be people who will say, no, you can't straddle two canoes. You have to pick one or the other. Otherwise, you're just going to fall into the water. Well, that might work if you see the spiritual influences in this community as being in competition with each other, trying to get somewhere first. I like to think of it as a kind of flotilla. Even though I spend most of my time in one of the canoes, I find that there are times when I can be enriched and strengthened and supported by spending some time in one of the other canoes. I don't want to mix metaphors too much, but no matter what field we find ourselves standing in, it's not our duty to predetermine what kind of soil in which we're going to distribute our seed. We are called to embrace the task of sowing with an almost wasteful, careless glee, not worrying about predetermined goals or targets. We issue our invitation to life in all its fullness to whomever we encounter, to anyone. Yes, anyone who might show even the slightest inclination to listen. We are good and faithful servants if we let people know that there is a place with a genuine welcome and an open table. A welcome which is given in the name of a God of generosity, a Messiah with open arms, and a Spirit which enlivens all. We trust that there will be a fruitful harvest, guided by the God of the harvest. So may it be.